The Princess by Alfred Tennyson. Prologue. Sir Walter Vivian, all a summer's day, gave his broad lawns until the set of sun. Up to the people, thither flocked at noon, his tenants, wife and child, and thither half the neighboring borough, with their institute, of which he was the patron. I was there from college, visiting the sun, a Walter too, with others of our set, 5 others, we were 7, at Vivian Place. And me that morning Walter showed the house, Greek, set with busts, from vases in the hall, flowers of all heavens, and lovelier than their names, grew side by side, and on the pavement lay carved stones of the abbey ruin in the park, huge ammonites, and the first bones of time, and on the tables every clime and age, jumbled together, Celts and calumet, claymore and snowshoe, toys in lava, fans of sandal, amber, ancient rosaries, laborious orient, ivory, laborious orient, ivory, sphere in sphere, the cursed Malayan crease, and battle clubs, from the Isles of Palm, and higher on the walls, betwixt the monstrous horns of elk and deer, his own forefathers' arms and armor hung. And this, he said, was Hugh's at Agincourt, and that was old Sir Ralph's at Ascalon. A good knight we keep a chronicle, with all about him, which he brought, and I dived in a hoard of tales that dealt with knights, half legend, half historic, counts and kings, who laid about them at their wills and died, and mixed with these a lady one that armed her own fair head, and sallying through the gate, had beat her foes with slaughter from her walls. O miracle of women, said the book, O noble heart, who, being straight besieged by this wild king to force her to his wish, nor bent nor broke, nor shunned a soldier's death, but now, when all was lost, or seemed as lost, her stature more than mortal in the burst of sunrise, her arm lifted, eyes on fire, break with the blast of trumpets from the gate, and falling on them like a thunderbolt, she trampled some beneath her horse's heels, and some were whelmed with missiles of the wall, and some were pushed with lances from the rock, and part were drowned within the whirling brook. O miracle of noble womanhood, so sang the gallant, glorious chronicle, and all wrapped in this. Come out, he said, to the abbey. There is Aunt Elizabeth and Sister Lilia with the rest. We went. I kept the book and had my finger in it. Down through the park, strange was the sight to me, for all the sloping pasture murmured, sown with happy faces and with holiday. There moved the multitude, 1,000 heads, the patent leaders of their institute, taught them with facts. One reared a font of stone, and drew from butts of water on the slope the fountain of the moment, playing now a twisting snake, and now a rain of pearls. Our steep up spout were on the guided ball, danced like a wisp, and somewhat lower down, a man with knobs and wires and vials fired a cannon. Echo answered in her sleep from hollow fields, and here were telescopes for azure views, and there a group of girls in a circle waited, whom the electric shock dislinked with shrieks and laughter. Round the lake a little clockwork steamer paddling plied, and shook the lilies perched about the knolls. A dozen angry models jetted steam. A petty railway ran, a fire balloon rose gem-like before the dusky groves, and dropped a fairy parachute, and passed. And there, through 20 posts of telegraph, they flashed a saucy message to and fro between the mimic stations, so that sport went hand in hand with science. Otherwise, pure sport, a herd of boys with clamor bowled and stumped the wicket. Babies rolled about like tumbled fruit in grass, and men and maids arranged a country dance, and flew through light and shadow, while the twangling violin struck up with soldier laddie, and overhead the broad ambrosial aisles of lofty lime made noise with bees and breeze from end to end. Strange was the sight and smacking of the time, and long we gazed, but satiated at length. Come to the ruins, high arched and ivy clasped, a finest Gothic, lighter than a fire. Through one wide chasm of time and frost they gave the park, the crowd, the house, but all within the sward was trim as any garden lawn. And here we lit on Aunt Elizabeth, and Lilia with the rest, and lady friends from neighbor seats, and there was Ralph himself, a broken statue, propped against the wall, as gay as any, joys. Lilia, wild with sport, half child, half woman, as she was, had wound a scarf of orange round the stony helm, and robed the shoulders in a rosy silk that made the old warrior from his ivied nook glow like a sunbeam. Near his tomb a feast shone silver set, about it lay the guests, and there we joined them, and the maiden aunt took this fair day for text, and from it preached an universal culture for the crowd, and all the things great, but we unworthy are told. And he had squeezed himself betwixt the bars, and he had breathed the proctor's dogs, and one discussed his tutor, rough to common men, but hunting at the whisper of a lord, and one the master as a rogue in grain, veneered with sanctimonious theory. But while they talked, above their heads I saw the feudal warrior, lady-clad, which brought my book to mind. And opening this, I read of old Sir Ralph, a page or two that rang, with tilt and tourney, then the tale of her that drove her foes with slaughter from her walls. And much I praised her nobleness, and where axed Walter, patting Lilia's head, she lay beside him. Lives there such a woman now? Quick, answered Lilia, there are thousands now, such women, but convention beats them down. It is but bringing up, no more than that. You men have done it. How I hate you all. Ah, were I something great, I wish I were. Some might poetess, I would shame you then, that love to keep us children. Oh, I wish that I were some great princess. I would build far off from men a college like a man's, and I would teach them all that men are taught. We are twice as quick. And here she took aside the hand that played the patron with her curls, and one said smiling, pretty were the sight, if our old halls could change their sex, and flaunt with prudes for proctors, the wagers for deans, and sweet girl graduates in their golden hair. I think they should not wear our rusty gowns, but move as rich as emperor moths. Our Ralph who shines so in the corner. Yet I fear, if there were so many Lilias in the brood, however deep you might embower the nest, some boy would spy it. And this, upon the sward, she tapped her tiny, silken sandaled foot. That's your light way, but I would make it death for any male thing but to peep at us. Petulant she spoke, and at herself she laughed. A rosebud set with little wilful thorns, and sweet as English air could make her she. But Walter hailed a score of names upon her, and petty ogress, and ungrateful puss, and swore he longed at college, only longed. All else was well, for she's society. They boated and they cricketed. They talked at wine in clubs, of art, of politics. They lost their weeks, they vexed the souls of deans. They rode, they betted, they made 100 friends, and caught the blossom of the flying terms, but missed the minuet of Vivian Place, the little hearth-flower Lilia. Thus he spoke, part banter, part affection. True, she said, we doubt not that. Oh yes, you missed us much. I'll stake my ruby ring upon it you did. She held it out, and as a parrot turns, up through gilt wires, a crafty, loving eye, and takes a lady's finger with all care, and bites it for true heart, and not for harm. So he hung with Lilias. Daintily she shrieked, and wrung it. Doubt my word again, she said. Come listen, here is proof that you were missed. We 7 stayed at Christmas up to read, and there we took one tutor as to read the hard-grained muses of the cube and square. We were out of season. Never man, I think, so mouldered on a sinecure as he. For while our cloisters echoed frosty feet, and our long walks were stripped as bare as brooms, we did but talk you over, pledge you all, and wassail often like as many girls, sick for the holies and the ewes of home, and many little trifling Lilias played, charades and riddles, as at Christmas here. And what's my thought, and when and where and how, as here at Christmas, she remembered that. A pleasant game, she thought. She liked it more than magic music forfeits all the rest. But these, what kind of tales did men tell men? She wondered by themselves. A half-disdain perched on the pouted blossom of her lips, and Walter nodded at me. He began. The rest would follow, each in turn, and so we forged a 7-fold story. Kind? What kind? Chimeras? crochets, Christmas solecisms, seven-headed monsters, only made to kill, time by the fire in winter. Kill him now, the tyrant. Kill him in the summer, too, said Lilia. Why not now? The maiden aunt. Why not a summer's as a winter's tale? A tale for summer as befits the time, and something it should be to suit the place. Heroic for a hero lies beneath, grave solemn. Walter warped his mouth at this, to something so mock solemn that I laughed, and Lilia woke with sudden thrilling mirth, an echo like a ghostly woodpecker, hid in the ruins, till the maiden aunt, a little sense of wrong touched her face with color, turned to me with, as you will, heroic if you will, or what you will, or be yourself, you hero, if you will. Take Lilia then, for heroine clamored he, and make her some great princess, 6 feet high, grand, epic, homicidal. And be you the prince to win her. Then follow me, the prince. I answered, each be a hero in his turn, 7 and yet 1, like shadows in a dream. Heroic seems our prince as required, but something made to suit with time and place, a Gothic ruin and a Grecian house, a talk of college and of ladies' rights, a feudal knight in silken masquerade, and yonder shrieks and strange experiments, for which the good Sir Ralph had burnt them all. This were a melody. We should have him back. Who told the winter's tale to do it for us? No matter, we will say whatever comes. Let the ladies sing us, if they will, in time to time some ballad or a song, to give us breathing space. So I began, and the rest followed. And the women sang, between the rougher voices of the men, like linnets in the pauses of the winds. And here I give the story and the songs. And let's remember that those who have more than they need should enrich society. But this is done in a way that mythically enhances the opportunity of those opening opportunity for the rest of society, right? A prince I was, blue-eyed and fair in face, of temper amorous as the 1st of May, with lengths of yellow ringlet, like a girl, for on my cradle shone the northern star. There lived an ancient legend in our house, some sorcerer whom a far-off grandsire burnt, because he cast no shadow, had foretold, dying, that none of all our blood should know the shadow from the substance, and that one should come to fight with shadows and to fall. For so my mother said the story ran, and truly waking dreams were more or less an old and strange affection of the house. Myself too had weird seizures, heaven knows what, on a sudden in the midst of men and day. And while I walked and talked as heretofore, I seemed to move among a world of ghosts, and feel myself the shadow of a dream. Our great court Galen poised his gilt-head cane, and pawed his beard, and muttered catalepsy. My mother, pitying, made 1,000 prayers. My mother was as mild as any saint, half canonized by all that looked on her. So gracious was her tact and tenderness. But my good father thought, a king, a king. He cared not for the affection of the house. He held his sceptre like a pedant's wand to lash a fence, and with long arms and hands reached out and picked offenders from the mass for judgment. Now it chanced that I had been, while life was yet in bud and blade, betrothed to one, a neighboring princess. She to me was proxy wedded, with a bootless calf at 8 years old, and still from time to time came murmurs of her beauty from the south, and of her brethren youths, puissance, and still I wore her picture by my heart, in one dark tress, and all about them both sweet thoughts that swarm as bees about their queen. You find in America and in Europe the idea of perhaps having an age of marriage was something they quite thought, and 7 or 8, depending on the church, is when you were fully accountable according to that tradition, I would put it, at least at adolescence and sanity. But we do, if you've been around a while, you probably can notice a kid and like, oh, you're going to be such and such in 10 years or whatever, and end up being right to some degree. But the way it's put here sounds kind of off. But arranging marriages before you're going to go off, live together, and consume them was a normal thing. But when the days drew nigh that I should wed, my father sent ambassadors with furs and jewels and gifts to fetch her. These brought back a present, a great labor of the loom, and therewithal an answer vague as wind. Besides, they saw the king. He took the gifts, and he said there was a compact. That was true. But then she had a will. Was he to blame? And the maiden fancies loved to live alone among her women, certain would not wed. That morning in the presence room I stood, with Cyril and Florian, my 2 friends. The first, a gentleman of broken means, his father's fault, but given to starts and bursts of revel, and the last, my other heart, and almost my half-self, for still we moved together, twined as horse's ear and eye. Now while they spake, I saw my father's face grow long and troubled like a rising moon. Inflamed with wrath, he started on his feet, tore the king's letter, snowed it down, and rent the wonder of the loom through warp and woof, from skirt to skirt, and at the last he sware that he would send 100,000 men and bring her in a whirlwind. Then he chewed the thrice-turned cud of wrath, and cooked his spleen, communing with his captains of the war. At last I spoke, my father, let me go. It cannot be that some gross error lies in this report, this answer of a king, whom all men rate as kind and hospitable. Or maybe I myself, my bride once seen, whatever my grief, to find her less than fame, may rue the bargain made. And Florian said, I have a sister at the foreign court who moves about the princess. She, who wedded with a nobleman from thence. He, dying lately, left her, as I hear, the lady of 3 castles in that land. Through her this matter might be sifted clean. And Cyril whispered, take me with you too. Then, laughing, what if these weird seizures come upon you in those lands, and no one near to point you out the shadow from the truth? Take me, I'll serve you better in a strait. I'll grate on rusty hinges here. But no, roared the rough king, you shall not. We ourselves will crush her pretty maiden fancies dead. In iron gauntlets break the council up. But when the council broke, I rose and passed through the wild woods that hung about the town, found a still place and plucked her likeness out, laid it on flowers and watched it lying bathed in the green gleam of dewy, tasseled trees. What were those fancies? Wherefore break her troth? Proud looked the lips, but while I meditated, a wind arose and rushed upon the south, and shook the songs and whispered, and the shrieks of the wild woods together, and a voice went within it, Follow, follow, that shalt win. Then ere the silver sickle of that month became her golden shield, I stole from court with Cyril and with Florian, unperceived, cat-footed, through the town, and half in dread, to hear my father's clamour at our backs, with ho from some bay window, shake the night. But all was quiet from the bastion walls. Like threaded spiders, one by one we dropped, and flying reached the frontier. Then we crossed to a livelier land, and so by tilth and grange and vines and blowing bosks of wilderness, we gained the mother city, thick with towers. In the imperial palace found the king. His name was Gamma, cracked and small his voice, but bland the smile, at like a wrinkling wind on a glassy water, drove his cheek in lines. A little dry old man without a star, not like a king. 3 days he feasted us, and on the 4th I spake of why we came. And my betrothed, you do us, prince, he said, airing a snowy hand and signet gem. All honor we remember love ourselves. In our sweet youth there did come a compact pass, long summers back, a kind of ceremony. I think the year in which our olives failed. I would you had her, prince, with all my heart, with my full heart. But there were widows here, 2 widows, Lady Psyche, Lady Blanca. They fed her theories in and out of place, maintaining that with equal husbandry. The women were on equal with the man. The women were unequal to the man. They harped on this. With this our banquets rang. Our dances broke and buzzed in knots of talk. Nothing but this. My very ears were hot to hear them. Knowledge, so my daughter held, was all in all. They had but been, she thought, as children. They must lose the child. Assume the woman. Then, sir, awful odes she wrote, too awful, sure, for what they treated of. But all she is and does is awful. Odes about this losing of the child, and rhymes, and dismal lyrics, prophesying change beyond all reason. These the women sang. And they that know such things I sought but peace. No critic I would call them masterpieces. They mastered me. At last she begged a boon, a certain summer palace, which I have, hard by your father's frontier. I said no, yet being an easy man gave it, and there all wild to found an university for maidens. On the spur she fled, and more. We know not only this, they see no men, not even her brother Arak, nor the twins. Her brethren, though they love her, look upon her as a kind of paragon, and I, pardon me, saying it, were much loath to breed. Dispute betwixt myself and mine, but sense and I confess with right, You think me bound in some sort I can give you letters to her. And yet, to speak the truth, I rate your chance, almost, at naked nothing. Thus, the king. And I, though nettled, that he seemed to slur, with garrulous ease and oily curtsies, our formal compact, yet, not less, all frets, but chaffing me on fire to find my bride, went forth again with both my friends. We rode many a long league back to the north, at last from hills that looked across a land of hope. We dropped with evening on a rustic town set in a gleaming river's crescent curve, close at the boundary of the Liberties. There entered an old hostel, called mine host. To counsel plied him with his richest wines, and showed the late writ letters of the king. And we find that, man nor woman was meant to be alone. And they have differences in which they are not the same, and it's not about having power over one another either. But this war of the genders has definitely taken full swing, hasn't it?